What Jasmine Crockett exposes here isn't just political tension, it's a blueprint of how power can be twisted, hidden, and protected when no one's willing to hold the line. This moment forces us to look at the bigger pattern, what happens when accountability collapses, and those in charge start deciding which laws matter and which ones don't.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and thank you for calling this hearing. Since January, Donald Trump has used the full power of the federal government to attack Americans in cities across the country. In Donald Trump's America, you are at increased risk of experiencing militaristic operations in your home, increased risk of being subject to detainment by mass thugs and wannabe vigilantes, increased risk of suffering injuries due to reckless and illegal acts by rogue federal agents, increased risk of being deported to foreign nations even if you are an American citizen, and you're at an increased risk of being targeted by federal government for criticizing the president and his friends. Congressional Republicans have completely abandoned their Article I powers and have exchanged their responsibility to their constituents with fealty to the president. They have allowed the president to morph federal agencies into instruments of autocracy. And as a result, the president has been able to ignore federal law, disregard court orders, and implement the largest pay-for-play scheme in American history. The White House, well, what's left of it anyway, is literally up for sale. The federal courts have characterized this presidency as, quote, lawless. In fact, when ruling against illegal acts committed by the administration, a Republican-appointed federal judge stated, quote, the court cannot imagine how the public interest might be served by permitting federal officials to flaunt the very laws they have sworn to enforce. In a separate case where the administration was sued for unlawful acts, the judge, also a Republican appointee, stated, quote, allowing constitutional rights to be dependent upon the grace of the executive branch would be a dereliction of duty by this third and independent branch of government and would be against the public interest. But in another case, the court summed it up perfectly by declaring, quote, as is becoming far too common, we are confronted again with the efforts of the executive branch to set aside the rule of law in pursuit of its own goals. Judiciary Committee Republicans have been completely complicit in this corruption. But since they're so interested in restoring law and order, I have a couple of suggestions on where they can start. Number one, this is the President of the United States standing beside his best friend, Jeffrey Epstein. As we all know, Mr. Epstein is one of the most notorious sexual predators in American history. For 8 weeks, the Republicans on this committee have chosen to protect these two men instead of providing justice to Mr. Epstein's victims. Now the administration is panicking. First, they campaigned on releasing the Epstein files. Then AG Bondi and Associates did a photo op with the files, and she said, and I quote, the Epstein list is on my desk. Then somehow the Epstein list didn't exist. Then the Epstein files became a Democratic hoax. Now the president is supposedly supportive of releasing the files, even though he's currently ignoring a congressional subpoena to do so. Now the president is simply crashing out. And it's because he can't seem to explain his special decades-long relationship with one of the most prominent sexual predators in American history. It's already public that he's in the Epstein files, but his administration is hiding the context of his involvement, if any, with Mr. Epstein's horrific crimes. Now, this is Miss Ghislaine Maxwell. Miss Maxwell, who obviously helped Jeffrey Epstein traffic more than 1,000 women and girls, well, Donald Trump is now giving her special treatment while she's serving out her prison sentence. He won't even rule out giving her a pardon or commuting her sentence. I don't need to explain why pardoning sex traffickers wouldn't be restoring law and order. Now, this is Secretary of Homeland Security, Kristi Noem. Not only has Secretary Noem been busy filming propaganda ads, she's also been busy cashing in on millions of taxpayer dollars. In fact, Secretary Noem has funneled millions of dollars to a company called the Strategy Group. The Strategy Group helped Secretary Noem win her campaign to become the governor of South Dakota. Corey, Lewandowski, her top policy advisor, has worked with the firm, and the company's CEO is married to Secretary Noem's chief spokesperson, Mrs. Tricia McLaughlin. This is what corruption looks like. They're stealing money from the American people's pockets and depositing it into their bank accounts. Now we move on to yet somebody else. This is the so-called border czar, Tom Homan. Mr. Homan is on tape accepting $50,000 in cash bribes stuffed in a brown paper bag from an undercover FBI agent. Apparently, Mr. Homan accepted these bribes in exchange for awarding federal contracts to his friends. Trump's Department of Justice killed the investigation into Mr. Homan's crimes, and congressional Republicans didn't say a mumbling word. Lastly, this is insurrectionist and Nazi sympathizer Ed Martin. It appears that Mr. Martin is functioning as the Associate Deputy Attorney General, Pardon Attorney, Director of the Fake Weaponization Working Group, and Special Attorney for Mortgage Fraud. All that means is that Mr. Martin is Trump's lapdog, whom the president sends to initiate lawsuits against the president's perceived political opponents. This is what we call organized crime. They're breaking the law, often by stealing taxpayer dollars, covering up their crimes by ending and obstructing investigations, then prosecuting people who call out their unlawful behavior. And while the Republicans are encouraging this corruption, they're abandoning actual victims of violent crime and ignoring the Republican-led state's 21st century murder crisis. In September's appropriation markup, congressional Republicans proposed reducing the FBI staff by thousands of positions and underfunding the agency by more than $1 billion. They've proposed slashing resources from the ATF. They've proposed cutting grants for juvenile justice programs and hate crimes and eliminating the community violence intervention and prevention grants. They're literally defunding the police. So no matter what they say at today's hearing, congressional Republicans have proven that they are not investing in keeping American communities safe from violent crime. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
What you just witnessed from Representative Jasmine Crockett wasn't just a political statement. It was a detailed breakdown of how power can be warped, redirected, and used in ways that ignore the public interest. She didn't simply list accusations, she drew a clear map of how institutions begin to erode when oversight collapses and when loyalty to a single political figure becomes more important than loyalty to the law itself. The most important thing to understand here is that Crockett isn't warning about isolated incidents. She's describing a pattern. When she talks about the administration reshaping federal agencies into tools of political protection, she's pointing to something deeper. The way democracies weaken, not through dramatic announcements, but through small, repeated acts that chip away at accountability. When courts, including judges appointed by the same political party, start calling the executive's behavior lawless, it signals that something much larger is at stake than a single policy dispute. Her comments about the Epstein files and the shifting narrative around them highlight another issue that often gets lost in the political theater. When public officials make bold promises about transparency and then retreat from those promises, it creates distrust that affects everything else. Crockett is careful here not to make claims about what the files contain. Instead, she focuses on the inconsistency, the reversals, and the refusal to comply with a congressional subpoena. Those behaviors matter because transparency is not optional in a functioning democracy. When elected leaders pick and choose what information they allow the public to see, they distort the system that keeps power in check. She then walks viewers through examples of individuals placed in high-ranking positions who have long-standing controversies or unresolved ethical questions surrounding them. Her point is not that any single one of these situations defines an administration. Her point is that, taken together, they show how a system can begin to normalize behavior that would have once been unthinkable. When public officials are tied to personal enrichment, when oversight is blocked, when investigations are halted, and when individuals facing serious allegations continue to hold influence, it signals a government drifting further away from equal enforcement of the law. And Crockett connects it all to something people feel every day: real safety, real justice, and real accountability. While these political battles play out in Washington, communities across the country face rising challenges. And instead of strengthening institutions that help address them, she argues that those institutions are being weakened. Cutting critical public safety resources, defunding investigative agencies, and shrinking programs designed to prevent violence all have long-term consequences that eventually land on everyday people. What makes her critique powerful is not the volume. She isn't yelling. It's the clarity. She is drawing a distinction between the idea of law and order, which politicians often use as a slogan, and the practice of it, which requires consistency, transparency, and accountability. It's easy to talk about restoring order. It's much harder to follow the law yourself when it is inconvenient. Her final message is essentially a warning. If we allow loyalty to political figures to replace loyalty to the Constitution, if we allow misconduct to go unchallenged because it is politically useful, then the very institutions meant to protect the public will operate for the benefit of the few. Government starts working for those in power instead of those who put them there. And once that shift happens, it becomes much harder to reverse. If you found this breakdown helpful, if you want political commentary that cuts through the noise and explains the deeper patterns behind these hearings, make sure you subscribe to Left Lens. We're here to give you context, clarity, and the truth behind what you're watching. Not just the headlines, but the meaning behind them. Stay informed, stay engaged, and subscribe so you never miss a breakdown.